Whatever. Go on. Take over.
Okay. This is Jeffrey Tucker with Liberty.me, and it's my pleasure to be here today with Daniel B. Klein, full professor of economics at George Mason University, author of a wonderful book, Knowledge and Coordination. Am I getting the title right, Daniel?
You are.
Yeah, and the reason we're sort of hooking up today and doing the thing is that we both have a strong interest in the subject of using the term liberal correctly. I recently lamented in an article that the word seems to be, at least in the U.S., exclusively attached to, all the people we know too well, but that there's no better word to describe actually, what it is we believe about self-organizing societies and free markets and the rule of law and that sort of thing. And you created a page, about a year ago or a couple of years ago, that was a kind of a campaign for libertarians, more or less, to call themselves liberals. Is that right?
Yes, it is. It's called Liberalism Unrelinquished, and it's a declaration of no surrender on the word liberal. Essentially, people signing it are sort of showing that they intend not to speak of the left as liberal. It's not necessary. I don't feel it's so necessarily about calling ourselves liberal as opposed to libertarian or even conservative or whatever else classical liberals might be calling themselves. To me, the most important thing is not to hand them that term, because I think it's a very, very powerful word, liberal. An advantageous word for whoever gets to be identified as the liberal.
Now, why do you think it's such a powerful term, and why do you think it matters? I mean, the meaning of terms change all the time. Why not just let it go and move on?
I think we need to really assess what's going on over the last several centuries, even. And I do think even the left is doing some soul searching in this respect, trying to figure out who they are and what they represent and how they stand in relation to movements and philosophers of the past. The left so much, dominates cultural institutions today that in some sense they're the establishment. This is particularly true, of course, in academia, but it's true in the media and other cultural institutions, as well as a lot of the government itself. So the left is sort of the establishment who's been administering something now going on 100 years. So they are conserving, right? Who are the conservatives? And I think they're wondering, where they fit in. But I think that going back to the Enlightenment and the 17th century, the rise, the emergence of liberalism, is really what people are trying to find their roots in. And when we do that, and we go beyond the United States, and we go beyond the 20th century, we really see that liberal has this larger meaning that hooks up well with libertarians and small government-minded people. And I think we should, preserve that, use that. The word liberal itself has this rich history, all these connotations, connection to the word liberty, obviously, connection, obviously, to the word to liberalize, as we still speak of liberalizing markets and liberalizing institutions and so on. So it's a powerful word. It's got connotations of toleration and generosity, all of which I think suits classical liberalism. So in the larger search of who we are and what the big picture is, I think we should use that term for ourselves, and we certainly should not relinquish that term to the left, who, to my mind, are really fundamentally about increasing governmentalization of social affairs, very contrary to what liberalism means in its original and long-standing sense.
Have you done much reflection on how it came to be that the term liberal is used to describe, the sort of state-centered left? And do you have any insights on that beyond just the story that I've heard many times, that everything began to change at the Progressive Era, and then the New Deal sort of was the final step in that. Do you have any thoughts on how it is that we lost the term and they gained it?
I have thoughts, but I don't have a simple storyline. Certainly, a crucial locus of the story is the Liberal Party in Britain and Liberal government in Britain, from Gladstone to the later Liberal Party, which became more the New Liberal, the Progressive. So the representatives and spokesmen of the Liberal Party itself in Britain adopted the new sort of social democratic, as it were, left outlook, and they said, this is what liberalism is now. This is the progression of the idea. So when you had the political party doing that, it really helped to subvert that particular term. Why that happened is a big question.
Is this World War I, before World War I, or immediately following?
Before World War I. Yeah. It starts. I'd like to say it starts in the 1880s in particular, where you have a number of terms undergoing changes in meaning. Liberal's just one of them, really. Thomas Hill Green, Hobhouse, and others like that, develop a sort of social democratic liberal outlook, kind of a left outlook. And again, it's not just the word liberal. The word liberty, freedom, justice, contract, property, rights, and others undergo changes or just fall into confusion, in my view. And so why did this happen? That's a very big question. I think the rise of democracy and the nation state and the democratic, specifically the democratic nation state and the mythology of universal suffrage, I think all that has a big part in it. Kind of like once we are the government and the government truly represents us through democratic institutions, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to put constraints and bounds on what the government can do. That kind of thinking, and then it creates this ethic and mentality of political community through the nation state. That becomes, I think, a big force, even if it's partly inchoate, even if it's partly not explicit. And so there's just this huge movement towards that, which leads to the whole subversion of the vocabulary of the liberal era.
There was within the old liberals a kind of like real clarity on the problem with hereditary monarchies and that sort of thing. But yes, I too detect a certain naivety concerning democracy. Even rereading Thomas Paine's Common Sense recently, I was struck by just how much it centered on the problem of kingship, but very little consciousness of the potential problems of a people's government.
Yeah, I think that the dangers of democracy was something that a lot of liberals, I think, were slow to be aware of and be properly wary of. Bentham, James Mill, certainly, many others. De Tocqueville, of course, was quite insightful on this matter.
Do you so you have reservations about so-called classical liberalism? There's certain problems that were extant within that way of thinking. So, but you don't think they're so serious that mean that we should surrender the term, that the liberal victories were so substantial and so sweeping that we need to call those our own?
Yeah, that's right. It's a very grand tradition. You put it very nicely in your piece about a magnificent intellectual heritage. I don't remember your exact words. That's the word for it, is liberal. And of course, there's problems in any system. I think there's a lot of just inherent paradox in government and trying to keep it somewhat contained and decent. So there's no easy answers for those problems. and the liberals grappled with them. My favorites among the liberals are David Hume and especially Adam Smith. I especially like the way they develop things, but it's clearly part of this whole long train that we are very much part of, and we should remain connected to. In fact, we should work better at connecting, I think, back to the original arc of liberalism, and try to move the conversation more on like those terms.
If you were going to summarize the fundamental liberal insight, what would you say it is or was or should be or has been?
That there is a natural idea of, first of all, commutative justice, or just justice, if you like, to keep it simple. But it's just, to me, it's actually one facet of justice. But it's it's what Smith called the precise and accurate sort of justice of property, consent, and contract, not messing with other people's stuff. Very libertarian idea, very, thoroughly common and familiar to libertarians, well understood by libertarians. So that idea of justice as a virtue that you practice is to not mess with other people's stuff. And then there's like a flip side to that. By virtue of its rather precise and accurate nature, it has this flip side of others not messing with your stuff. And our word for that is liberty. And it's a concept that we apply not only among equals like our neighbors, like we enjoyed liberty from our neighbor messing with our stuff, but also from the government, which is, to Hume and Smith, a different kind of relationship, but I think they still see the concept of liberty applying the same way. So when the government messes with our stuff, it is a violation of liberty. Now, it might be one of these exceptional violations that they will actually approve of, but still, semantically, conceptually, they see it as a violation of liberty, because this whole idea of justice and liberty is not a creature of Parliament. It's it's a natural convention for David Hume, and it's very universal. It's almost like a universal human law of equals not messing with each other's stuff. It's naturally selected, because in any society where people didn't refrain from messing with each other's stuff, that society wouldn't prosper, right? It wouldn't survive. That's one reason it's natural or necessary. So even if you think of it as a convention of sorts, it's a natural sort of convention. This is sort of my way of perhaps saying it's like a natural law.
I see.
Okay. Now I don't like some of the other connotations that the term natural law has. I'm not strongly opposed to the term, but I don't particularly use it. So there's like this natural idea of commutative justice and its flip side, liberty. That idea of liberty, I would say, is the central idea of classical liberalism, and the basic idea is in the relationship between the governor and the governed. Okay? There should be a presumption of liberty. Okay? Any proposals to contravene the principle of liberty should bear the burden of proof, just like the presumption of innocence. The prosecution bears the burden of proof. I would say liberalism is the idea that contraveners of the liberty principle of leaving people alone, essentially, and not messing with their stuff, even if you are the government, should bear the burden of proof. Now, in the Hume-Smith view, it's a burden of proof which can be overcome. Smith clearly endorses exceptions to the liberty principle. Sometimes I think his endorsements are overstated by some people, and sometimes I even think he's kind of fudging a bit on those things. But so it's not an axiom. In this way, I am more comfortable with Hume and Smith than I am with like Rothbard and 20th century libertarianism. But I don't think we should worry about that. The bigger picture is, hey, we're all for, like, as far as like where we're at in the status quo, for greatly degovernmentalizing things, for rolling back the extent of government involvement in social affairs, and those would be reforms in the direction of greater liberty.
Um, one of my favorite books that I've ever read is the one that continues to have a huge influence on me is Mises's Liberalism, which I guess was written in 1927. And when he wrote it, he said he didn't feel like there had really been a full scale summary of the liberal worldview up into that point, and he sought to write one. Do you like that book, and do you agree that in 1927 it seemed like there wasn't anything around really that seemed to summarize what liberalism was all about?
I certainly like the book, and I have tremendous reverence for Mises. I do have some reservations of Mises in terms of like his idea of science, his image of science, particularly economics, and so I've been somewhat critical of that. But to me, Mises is a total giant of liberalism. He's the person who, more than any other single person, bridges classical liberalism and 20th century modern libertarianism. And it's just a very, very important and central guy, and very brilliant and insightful and broad and everything else. Yes, I like that book. I love that he's calling it liberalism. Was there anything else representing it so well then? I'm not sure there was anything all that current. I wouldn't say that William Graham Sumner or Herbert Spencer were so old, 1927, or so dated. I'm not quite sure, but certainly, absolutely, there was a nadir of liberalism then, right? I mean, there was a collapse of liberal culture and the liberal movement. Basically, almost none of the young people of the generation of, say, 1900 or 1910 were sort of being raised up as liberals and believed in it and going forward. So in that sense, yeah, I think he was definitely filling a void. That's the reason he was so prominent.
Do you think that there's any danger to modern libertarians in the 21st century, however inadvertently, detaching themselves from this liberal tradition?
Do I think there's problems with that? Yeah, I do. Certainly. Look, I come from Rothbard. I come from sort of Walter Block in high school and free market economics and Austrian economics, and kind of regular American libertarianism. And I honestly feel like, especially Hume and Smith, are richer, frankly. Mm-hmm. I honestly feel this way, and I honestly feel that Rothbard, Mises, in some respects, can actually be limiting. And I really feel like we do need to see the bigger arc, the longer history, and deal with more of these limitations in our principles. Limitations which might mean that we can only really endorse them as by and larges, for example. Admit of exceptions. Basically accept the existence of government. I know that might be hard for you, Jeff.
No,
but
I can't. I just this is painful, Daniel. Painful.
When I say accept, I mean like develop a philosophy, whatever, political ethics that works with and figures on that governor-governed relationship, superior-inferior relationship, alongside or in addition to the equal of you and your neighbor, or you and your employer, or you and your workmate, or whatever the equal relationship is. I mean, we all would like to have, I think, a society. We all kind of, I think, in our genes even, have a penchant for a society of just the equal relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think that actually comes from the hunter-gatherer band, which is still in our genes. There was an alpha male, but it was sort of a first among equals, I think. And anybody could kill anybody, so you couldn't be too superior. I don't know if you know that line from Taxi Driver, but Travis Bickle wanted to kill that Politico, and he actually had trouble killing him, so he kind of learned that you can't kill anybody anymore, um, which is a good thing. So anyway, we want and we love the idea of equal to equal, and in a way, the Social Democrats too love the idea of thinking of it all as equal, but they think of the government within an equal relationship as though it's all part of a kind of social contract, like public affairs, government is actually just a type of equal. So anyway, I have a number of thoughts about, yes, I think libertarians do need to somehow get on to some of these other things, be more flexible, be more open about the compromises of the real world, the limitations of any set of principles, the lack of any definite foundation for our judgments. Certain things that I don't think are so much in the spirit of Rothbard and Rand and Mises on economics. So yes, my answer to your question is yes.
Well, let me ask you a question about the left, and I'm
Sure.
just wondering if I might as well ask it. I'm not expecting you to have some magical answer here, but one of the things that drives all of us nuts all the time is this sort of left liberal resentment against commercial society, and it always alarms me. It's like, how can extremely smart people otherwise imagine that you could have anything like a free society without a free economic sector? And so what seems to be the holdup there to your mind, as you look at the way left liberalism has sort of formed itself?
Well, I'm inclined to go to like political psychology there. I think they have conflicting feelings. Let's not think about some really hardcore left, but more of just like an interventionist Democrat left. I think at one moment, they won't say they're opposed to commercial society and commercial activity. Of course, they're out there in the shopping mall just like the rest of us, and taking advantage of it and maybe even appreciating it in a way. I think they often think of themselves as accepting even of market society, but just seeing a lot of need for tinkering and regulation and correcting market failures and those kinds of things. Although on the other hand, I do think they tend to have they tend to look towards, again, political community as an important source of meaning, and so they might resent the way commercial institutions maybe compete in a way with political institutions, with the government. Like they may not like the prominence of Walmart. Why is it that, like, why would there be all this animus against Walmart? I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but somehow that Walmart becomes focal as representing something. So I don't know. I think they're kind of conflicted themselves about these matters. I do tend to think
That's really insightful, actually. It does make a lot of sense that if you believe that the political community does truly represent society, then you do want it to have some predominating role. And when
focalness
it gets big and begins to sort of take over our lives and our culture, there begins to sort of a seething, sense of we've misordered our social priorities.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value to just to get back to why make a fuss about the word liberal. I really think it would be valuable to classical liberals, conservatives, libertarians to not call the left liberal. And I think you feel that way, and I feel that way as libertarians. I think it's also true for conservatives. I was very, very pleased that Charles Murray signed Liberalism Unrelinquished. Alan Charles Coors. There was a very nice piece at the National Review Online just a few days ago by Kevin Williamson about liberalism that was sort of like pro-liberalism and sort of denying that the left was liberal. Um, so I think, I think we are letting the left get away with a lot by calling them liberal. I really feel that way, and I really feel if we just called them the left, call them left liberal, even progressive, social democrat, Democrat, all these other terms they can have, as far as I'm concerned. But to allow them to represent liberalism, I think is a very, very foolish thing, not only for libertarians but for Republicans, as it were, for Fox News, as it were.
Well, let's say we ourselves start calling ourselves liberal, which I think you favor. How does it work? How does that work out in practice? I mean, are we going to be just throwing around a term that nobody's going to understand, or and maybe that's a good thing because it gives us an opportunity to explain? How does if we want to become liberals ourselves, how does it play itself out in our public rhetoric?
We can call ourselves liberal. You might use classical liberal. People might be familiar with that. Couple it maybe with classical liberal, libertarian. I mean, it's wordy and complicated, but some audiences know what you're talking about. It might be awkward, but it might have long-term benefits to go through that awkwardness, right? It just might be worth doing. How do we get ourselves recognized as liberals by people more generally? I don't know. I think we just have to persist. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think it's going to be like we ever get all the way there or something, or that like now we get called liberal and they don't, or they don't call themselves liberal. I mean, the left. I think probably they'll go on calling themselves liberal. But if we also call ourselves liberal, and if we don't call them liberal, I think it might gnaw on their conscience a bit, like who's the real liberal. Mm-hmm. I think if we do our homework and do our scholarship, there's a very good case to be made that like we're more the real liberal than they are. The term liberal started as a political term really by Scots, particularly Adam Smith, at the second half of the 18th century, and it was I think it's quite clear what Smith meant by it. Which was much more classical liberal libertarian than Paul Krugman or Rachel Maddow or what have you.
I was telling you the other day when we had our little talk, it was actually our first meeting. I don't think we met really before we started this little plan for this hangout before, but we had this nice conversation. I was telling you about being behind a truck the other day, and there's a bumper sticker that just said, "Not a liberal,"
Yeah, right. Like it's a strange thing to say.
So what are we supposed to take away from a bumper sticker like that? That he doesn't want, he's not going to let me be free, or what? What is? I mean, I know what he meant, but it just literally it's actually sort of scary.
I know it's but that it's so ingrained in that person's mind, that motorist's mind, that like liberal means like leftist and sort of government, pro-government and interventionist. So just I'm not one of them. But you step back with a little bit more perspective. You step outside of North America. You step outside of the 20th century. Backwards in time, and we do step out by reading those people, right? And thinking about the whole history of things. And it seems like just like you say, like a complete I'm a bigot.
Yeah, it's scary. Yeah. Let me ask you about another term. You might know something about this. It's always confused me slightly. The use of this term neoliberalism. You bump into it, and you get people on the left sort of using it as if it's just like to say somebody is a neoliberal is to like cast aspersions on them, just to sort of demonstrate their evil. That there's a capitalist imperialist sort of quantity to them, or a fascist corporatist idea. What do you know about the term neoliberalism, how it's used? Does anybody in the world self-describe as a neoliberal? What is your sense of that term?
The answer to that is basically no. No one self-describes. Now, you can look at particular moments, even like Milton Friedman in one essay. I'm not even sure if it was published. At one time, toyed with that word, and this person and that person have like used it. But essentially, the answer is no. It's never been a term people applied to themselves. It's always been a term, for the most part, and especially currently, that the left uses for everything they don't like, essentially.
Right.
Whatever is evil and vicious and they're against, that's all part of neoliberalism. It's not, in my view, like coherent, and it's a term or it's a practice among the left that really works best where the word liberal still means liberal. So it's much less used by the left in North America than in Europe or Latin America.
Latin America is where I've seen it usually.
Yeah.
Where
Because in those places, liberal still means something good. I mean, for us in the U.S., let me put it back up. In those places, like the very idea of like free markets is still like very suspicious, and the whole idea and the word liberal is still like, ooh, liberalism, like freedom and free markets and we want community and protection and all that. And so to them, it's like old liberalism. Liberalism is still old liberalism. So making a monster word, right, a bad word with the word liberalism makes sense for them, but it doesn't really make sense for North Americans, precisely because, in some sense, even the left still likes the idea that they're liberal. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I also get the sense that way the left describes neoliberalism in, say, Latin America is the equivalent of the way Americans describe use the term neoconservative in the U.S. There seems to be a parallel there.
That might be, but that might be just, again, people using words and putting all these evil things together that aren't really coherent, or there's no real representative. And
right.
I mean,
let me ask you one more thing, which actually does depart from our theme here, and I don't want to do this, but I have to, because if I don't ask you this question, all my left libertarian friends will be upset with me. Why are you so tough on the term leftism? Do you not even imagine that there's some redeeming features of the left as it's, in the 19th century, 18th century? Are you just completely ready to get rid of that one forever?
Yeah, I don't think the word left has really ever meant anything liberal, classical liberal. It's really a 20th century term. I know people talk about in the French Revolution there was this on the left, but it's not a term that you see used, at least in English language discourse. I think it's probably true in French discourse as well, where liberals are describing themselves as on the left or leftists or anything like that. It's really a term of the 20th century, left and then everything else is the right. So no, it's like the word progressive. The word progressive has never, to my mind, been anything good. They can have, I don't mind them calling themselves progressive either.
That one bugs me because I don't like the idea that somehow that there's anything related between state building and human progress. I mean that. I resent the use of the term progressive, and I like to think of myself as a progressive. I guess we could dispute these terms all day, but that one sort of sticks in my craw a little bit. Actually.
Yeah, it's sort of like got nice connotations as progress, but I'm just saying it's a term that really only came forward at the end of the 18th, 19th century, and has only meant progressives. So the other thing is the idea of progress, I think, is less of a liberal idea, actually, than the idea of improvement. So you might want to think about that. This is a point that I take from Stephen Davies. the idea of progress is very much like goal oriented. Like, are you making progress on your term paper, right? You know, like we're traveling to grandmother's house, we're making progress on our journey to like a destination of like a goal. Um, and the whole idea of like a social goal is, of course, not doesn't fit liberal ideas very well at all. But the idea of improvement makes a lot of sense. Kind of like we know our daily lives, we know our practice, our status quo, and we have a sense of what is improvement. So based on that distinction, I think it actually liberalism should think of itself more as a philosophy of improvement rather than of progress.
That's a
Again,
beautiful distinction. I like that very
so
much.
so on that matter as well, like they can have progressive.
Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you for that. That's lovely.
That's
Well,
thank you, babies.
yeah, no, it's actually my new book that comes out tomorrow. It's called Bit by Bit: How Peer-to-Peer Technology is Freeing the World, and that's exactly the idea I was trying to get across. That we make marginal improvements just step by step, without any sense of what the goal is, and that's a good thing. The whole point is just to get better, not to arrive anywhere.
Right, right.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad to be sort of united in this cause with you. I'm sort of making it a theme of this year. We had to have New Year's resolutions. We all do. So that was my resolution, that this year I would do my personal best to use the word liberal to describe, what liberalism truly is, and stop relinquishing the term to people who actually depart substantially from the liberal tradition. So, and when I wrote my article, I remembered now, having signed your beautiful site. Once again, the URL is
liberalismunrelinquished.net.
Okay, and there's
Kevin Fry is Kevin Fry was actually the instigator and the builder of the site, so I just want to acknowledge Kevin.
Yeah, that's a nice site, and I hope it lasts a long time. It has already many signatories. So, it actually occurred to me that if this kind of starts to take on certain energy, I could imagine that you could get some press, people interested in the term. So it's something we can all do, right? I mean, sometimes we have a sense that there's not much we can do ourselves personally to change the political culture, but the way we use language actually does matter, doesn't it?
Yes, correct. It's a semantic issue, but it's semantic issues are real important, especially when we're talking about words that are so central to us. Like, how would you feel if people didn't call you by your name, right? Or how would you feel if people didn't call your set of beliefs, your most important beliefs, by the name that it's been traditionally known or that you call it by? So semantics can be very important.
And it's something we can actually control, and something we can actually all do in our own lives. So thank you so much, Daniel, for meeting with me. And it's again a pleasure to meet you after all these years of knowing your name and reading your work. And I'm excited about your stuff. Your book, 2012, Oxford University Press, Knowledge and Coordination, a reflection very much in the Hayekian Smithian tradition. And it's been a pleasure visiting with you, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Whatever. Go on. Take over.
Okay. This is Jeffrey Tucker with Liberty.me, and it's my pleasure to be here today with Daniel B. Klein, full professor of economics at George Mason University, author of a wonderful book, Knowledge and Coordination. Am I getting the title right, Daniel?
You are.
Yeah, and the reason we're sort of hooking up today and doing the thing is that we both have a strong interest in the subject of using the term liberal correctly. I recently lamented in an article that the word seems to be, at least in the U.S., exclusively attached to, all the people we know too well, but that there's no better word to describe actually.
Going back to the Enlightenment and the 17th century, the rise, the emergence of liberalism is really what people are trying to find their roots in. And when we do that, we go beyond the United States, and we go beyond the 20th century, we really see that liberal has this larger meaning that hooks up well with libertarians and small government-minded people. And I don't think I think we should, you know, preserve that, use that. The word liberal itself has this rich history, all these connotations, connection to the word liberty, obviously, who they are and what they represent and how they stand in relation to movements and philosophers of the past. The left so much, dominates cultural institutions today that in some sense they're the establishment. This is particularly true, of course, in academia, but it's true in in the media, and other cultural institutions, as well as a lot of the government itself. So the left is sort of the establishment who's been administering something now going on 100 years. So they are conserving, right? Who are the conservatives? And I think they're wondering, where they fit in. But I think that
what it is we believe about self-organizing societies and free markets and the rule of law and that sort of thing. And you created a page, about a year ago or a couple of years ago, that was a kind of a campaign for libertarians, more or less, to call themselves liberals. Is that right?
yes, it is. It's called Liberalism Unrelinquished, and it's a declaration of no surrender on the word liberal. Essentially, people signing it are sort of showing that they intend not to speak of the left as liberal. It's not necessary. I don't feel it's so necessarily about calling ourselves liberal as opposed to libertarian or even conservative or whatever else classical liberals might be calling themselves. To me, the most important thing is not to hand them that term, because I think it's a very, very powerful word, liberal, an advantageous word for whoever gets to be identified as the liberal.
Now, why do you think it's such a powerful term, and why do you think it matters? I mean, the meaning of terms change all the time. Why not just let it go and move on?
I think we need to really assess what's going on over the last several centuries, even. And I do think even the left is doing some soul searching in this respect, trying to figure out